Hello everybody, welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia and today it's time for Friday Reads on May 31st. Yes, it's the last day of May. Another month has been squandered away sitting around and reading, and I am not sorry about it whatsoever. I am here to talk about my final week of reading in May and some other things as well. So settle in and grab your snacks and we'll go over the whole thing. Speaking of snacks, a first world tragedy occurred this week. I bought a box of, not a box, but like the bag, the container of double stuffed Oreos. I always get double stuff when I buy Oreos, and there are just single stuffed Oreos inside this bag. We have powered through, we're making the best of it, but we got cheated out of half of our stuff in our cookies this week, and yeah, I didn't have enough energy to assemble a lawsuit, but it's a pretty sad occasion when we opened that bag. In a possibly related story, though, I am loving the treadmill that I bought to offset the hours that I spend reading and eating Oreos, and it's really great. If you're thinking about buying one, it's awesome. Another excellent thing that happened is I received a book gift this week, and this is the nicest thing. So Marsha Johansson, who is very active on BookTube, and you've seen her in the comments on my channel and other channels, she's really thoughtful and funny and has lots of great book recommendations all the time. And she noticed that a book that she has recommended to me for probably a year, she's mentioned it several times and it sounds really cool, and I tried to request it at my library and they said it was not available from their vendor. I don't think it's been published in the US. And anyway, Marsha decided to gift me with this book because she really thinks that I'm going to love it. And so I was so excited to get this in the mail this week, and it is The Stranding by Kate Sawyer. And it was on the short list for the Costa Prize in 2021. I think it won another prize too, winner of the East Anglian Fiction Award. And the blurbs are not helpful whatsoever, but I did look up to see what this book is basically about. And it is a post-apocalyptic story, which of course is strongly up my alley. And it is a book that is, now I might be wrong. When I actually read it, I'll correct this if this is not accurate, but here's what it looks like it's about. There are two time periods in the story, and one is the life before a cataclysmic event, and the other part is the life after, and it goes back and forth with a woman named Ruth, and then something happens on a beach, and there's a stranded whale, and she and another man take refuge inside the mouth of a whale when something happens. I don't know what it is exactly. And then there's the life after, like the survival life of whatever happened. So I am so intrigued about this. And so I have this book, and she also sent a beautiful bookmark that's very appropriate with mermaid, kind of an underwater scene. And if you look, there is a seahorse. I love seahorses. And some tabs for my incessant tabbing and note-taking inside of my book. So thank you again, Marsha. And that was such a lovely delight to receive in the mail. I can't wait to read that. That's definitely going on the top of my July TBR. It's going to be an apocalyptic July. All right, I did finish The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. I talked about this last week, and this is a memoir that Joan Didion wrote during the year. She's reflecting upon the year after her husband abruptly passed away. He died in their apartment in New York while they were sitting down to dinner one night during a really rough time when their daughter was hospitalized in the ICU with sort of a mystery infection that just kind of snowballed into a septic situation, and she was extremely ill. And one evening after coming home, as they were getting ready for dinner, he had a massive coronary attack. And then her daughter appeared to recover from that illness, but unfortunately, not long thereafter, she became ill again. She collapsed in an airport with a hematoma and had had to have brain surgery. And so Joan Didion had no time really in between her husband dying, and she didn't have any recovery period because her daughter's crisis and illness continued on. So she reflects in this book upon the nature of grief and this idea of magical thinking, which is tricks that your mind plays on you that to sort of delay the full impact of what has happened, and just weird little things. And she talks a lot about how she basically effectively masks some of this going on in her mind and presents herself as a composed and logical person to the world at large, when in the back of her mind all kinds of crazy tricks are going on, and things like she can't drive around in a neighborhood she used to live in. It's almost like she thinks she's going to see herself and her family living in their old house, and she knows this is not going to happen, but she still just can't go over there. She spends a lot of time trying not to trigger certain avenues of thought and memory. And she reaches a point late in this book where she realizes that there's a difference between grief and mourning. And she talks about grief being something that just automatically happens when a loss occurs, but mourning, you have to actively participate. And because of Quintana's long illness, she had to delay her mourning, and it didn't start until much later, like a year later. So I read the book from Mental Health May as my nonfiction selection, and I really did enjoy it. And I was really kind of boggled at the amount of stressful things that Joan Didion had to endure all at once, and that she was able to sit and capture all of that experience and write about it so succinctly for this book. The only thing I would say that kind of made a bit of a barrier for me, and it's not really Didion's fault, but I have to confess that I was kind of distracted by the wealth of her family, which I don't begrudge them. And, some people are just wealthy people, and that's fine. But it did distract me because I couldn't help but think about certain things along the way. Like when she has to fly abruptly to LA because of Quintana's second illness, and then she stays in the Beverly, Wilshire, and she says, well, we always stay there, so I have to stay there, even though friends offered to put her up in their guest houses, and she is part of her magical thinking, like, we always stay here, so I have to stay here, and then it comes to an end and we all get to leave. But I kept thinking, oh my gosh, how much does that cost a night? And then another part where they fly in a private helicopter back to New York City, and I'm just like, wow, so it wasn't really, the nature of grief and loss and bereavement is not lessened by material things and money, but the fact that she lives in a different echelon of people than I do, I got a little distracted by it. And it's not her fault. I guess it's my fault as a reader of stopping and noticing things like that along the way, but I just did. The parts I liked were the heart of her dealing with those feelings and what I came there to read about, the nature of grief and mourning and how she processed it. And I don't really care about who she went to dinner with, so that's my only quibble, and perhaps I am petty, but those are things that I thought of when I was reading the book. But I'm really glad that I finally read it, because it's been on my list for a really long time, and now I have read it, and it was really an excellent selection from Mental Health May. The last book that was actually on my May TBR list was Himself by Jess Kidd, and I had selected this one for the May Magical Realism entry in the Ben Reads Good Challenge. And it's Jess Kidd's first book, but it's the last book that I've read by her. I've read her other 3 books, but I never circled back and read this very first one. So I did like it. It's really good. In the context of having read all her books, there is definitely a jumping point after the first 2, which I enjoyed all 4. But after the first 2, the level of her writing and her control of the plot and characters remarkably takes off in the third book and the fourth book, which are Things in Jars and Night Ship. She's really great all the way through with descriptions, settings, being really vivid with sights and smells. Ooh, she does a lot of work with smells and the way she describes characters. But the plots get a little wacky and out of hand in her first two novels, and that doesn't happen in the third and fourth one. There's a lot of elements that she comes back to. She likes to play around with ghosts and little supernatural elements and unlikely friendships and alliances. All that's great, but I really feel like it's really in her construction of plots that has greatly improved as she has continued on. I can't wait to see what she writes next. This is a book about a man named Mahoney, a young Irish man, and part of the book takes place in the mid-70s and part of it is further back in the 40s and 50s. And Mahoney is a young man in his 20s who grew up in an orphanage. And upon the passing of an old nun, he receives a letter with some information about his origins. So he goes back to this small town and he wants to find out the truth about his mother, what happened to her, why she gave him up, and possibly who his father was as well. So he goes there, and of course he makes some friends and some enemies in his quest to find out what happened. It is at different times funny, scary, creepy. There's an element of horror here. There are some very grisly, violent scenes, including some involving animals. So some of the ghosts that populate the story that Mahoney can see, we get backstories of how they became ghosts. And so some of it is a little hard to stomach because there's this sort of duality of funny descriptions with ominous plot line and some just some grisly descriptions as well. And I really enjoyed it, but just be warned, it gets a little gross and grisly at different points in the story. I want to share with you, I have shared the way she describes people before, but something that's really stood out to me in here was how she will describe the same person accurately, but the vibe of the description or the connotations of their description changes based on who is in the scene, whether that is a negative or a positive. So there's an old lady named Mrs. Colley in this book that is a wonderful supporting character and becomes good friends with Mahoney. And in an early scene, this is how she is described by Father Quinn, who is a very sanctimonious priest in town and no friend of Mrs. Colley. She's a thorn in his side because she is a retired actress who is just kind of irreverent and vulgar at times, and she puts on town plays that he thinks are inappropriate. So he goes to visit Mrs. Colley, who is very infirm in body, but she is on fire in her mind. Father Quinn pulls up a chair and waits, watching Mrs. Colley sleep. She has the same subterranean look as a bog corpse he once saw in a museum. She could easily have been spat out by some remote wetland, her body preserved by its dark juices. She's an archaeological find from another time, her skin as brittle as vellum and stained with age. She has a seedy string of pearls around her neck rather than a hangman's rope, and no doubt her stomach would give up a very good last meal, not a caked smear of gruel. Well, a little bit later on, in another scene, Mahoney is looking at her. She's been out in the rain, and they've gone into a pub, and they're trying to get her dried off and comfortable. And the same person is described like this. Tige gives Mahoney some bar towels for Mrs. Colley to knot about her head while her wig dries off. And there she sits at the table, flushed and beaming, decadent and regal, hopelessly frail, and blazing with life. So I love that different versions of the same person presented. And Mrs. Colley has a bunch of wigs, and they all have names, which made me think of Moira from Schitt's Creek, because she feels very strongly about her collection of wigs. So reaching the end of that TBR gave me a couple of days to fiddle around with some things on my cart and stuff I wanted to read. And so the first thing I picked up was Eastbound by Maylis de Kerangal. Hopefully that's how she pronounces that. It was written in French and translated by Jessica Moore. This was a book, there's this little, the little sticker there is New York Times Book Review, 10 Best Books of 2023. Yeah, so it's fairly new. Very slim novella. Let us sing the praises of novellas that just manage to encapsulate the characters, the story, all the things that make a novel in just these short pages. With this book is only 127 pages, but they are little pages. So I think it would be coming in well under 100 pages if it was a full-size book. This also is in the great tradition of stories that take place on a train. So we basically have two main characters here. We have a very young man named Alyosha, who is a 20-year-old Russian conscript. The time is in the current time, but he has been drafted. There's a group of young men, and they're all being transported, and they don't know where they're going. They're on a Trans-Siberian train, heading to some destination that has not been shared with them, with orders being barked at them, and everyone's nervous, but it manifests differently in different people. So there's guys that are just jostling around and making jokes. There's guys that look scared. There's bullies and guys that are, I don't know what, they're looking forward to being in the military, and other ones that have done all kinds of things to try to get out of it and failed, which is where Alyosha finds himself. And he starts to think about running away. At the same time, there's a French woman named Helene on this train as well. And she has a different reason for being on the train. And the two have a chance encounter and form an unlikely partnership. And that is all I'm going to say about the plot. But I was thinking about all the different books and movies that I've read that use the atmosphere of a train to heighten the effect. The tight quarters, the forced proximity to other people, the combination of different people there for different reasons from different walks of life, the claustrophobia of it, the surrealness of waking up and sleeping and seeing different things passing by through the windows, and all of that is tapped into for the atmosphere in this short book. And it is tense from the very beginning. It is so tense and suspenseful, and you'll just blast right through it. And I'm gonna have to read it again to savor the writing and the descriptions, because I got really caught up in reading it too fast for plot to find out what was going to happen. And I don't want to say anything else about it, but it was really good. I cannot disagree with this top 10 rating. I then went on and also read The First State of Being by Erin Entrada Kelly. This is a middle grade book, and I wanted to read this book. I have read another book by this author. I think I read Hello Universe back when I was still working as a children's librarian, because it was on our Texas Bluebonnet list, which is a suggested reading list for young readers. But this one, I had read good reviews about it, and then I saw a couple of people reading it. I know that Lindy read it on Lindy's Magpie Reads, and then my reading friend Michael read it, and he liked it too. We were reading middle grade books together. And we recently read When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead. And in the opening of this book, this is the dedication for the Laughing Man. And that is a character in When You Reach Me. So already I'm like, woo, it's going to be good. And this is a book that takes place in 1999, the summer of 1999. There's a group of kids that live in an apartment complex in Delaware. And one of them, Michael, our main character, he's an anxious kid, and he is really worried about the approaching Y2K. He thinks that maybe something disastrous is going to happen. He's secretly shoplifting and stashing provisions under his bed. He worries about his mom, who works 3 jobs to make ends meet. His best friends are his teenage babysitter, and an older man who is the caretaker at the apartment complex. He's kind of awkward. He's very shy. He would like to have more friends, but he clams up. He freezes up when people talk to him. And into this scenario, a strange boy in weird clothes suddenly appears, and we soon find out that his name is Ridge, and he is from the future. Now, the story is told through the scenes with these characters in 1999, and also in pieces of different media from the future. We have some transcripts of conversations, interviews, different pieces of data. They put together where Ridge came from and what was happening, and how he was able to send himself back to 1999, where he shouldn't be and knows it, but he is so into the 90s and he really wants to go to the mall. So it is charming, it's touching, and through the events that happen, which, you know, make your mind stretch and bend a little bit to understand the time travel, and also Michael's growth and learning some things about himself that help him deal with his own personality and moving forward. And then, last but not least, I am currently reading I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman, and it was translated from French by Schwarz. Now, this is a booktube made me do it. So many people have reviewed this book, and I was so intrigued by the strangeness of the description, and I really wanted to read it. And now I'm about 50 pages from the end, so I'm going to read the rest of it today. My desire to read it got heightened recently when my daughter was here last week, and she had a book she was reading, but we got to talking about different books, and I showed her this. I said, this looks like one that you would like, and she just sat down and read the whole thing. There is an underground bunker, and in this bunker there is a group of 40 women that are caged up, and they have electricity and running water, and they're given food every day by these guards who never speak to them, and if they want to communicate anything to them, they flick a whip. And the women have these really hazy memories of having regular lives some years before, and then something happened, and nobody can exactly remember what it was, of how they got from a previous life to this life. And in their midst is one really young woman who was put in there with them as a little girl. And when they all came in, they're not like all gathered up from a village. They don't know each other, but they've come to know each other. And so our narrator is the youngest one, and she doesn't have a name. They call her the child. And she has different ways of thinking and looking at things because she doesn't have a before life. And also, she's got some teenage mental energy at the beginning of the story. She's telling the story from a later time looking back, but she begins to have some thoughts and questions that sort of disrupt the status quo that has set in on the daily survival of these women, and it leads to changes. So that's all I'm going to say. But there's lots of questions about why they're there, what is the purpose, what happened. I don't know I'm near the end, and I don't know which things are going to be fully explained or answered or not, or if that's even the point. But I will report back next week after I have finished the book with my final thoughts. But it's really gripping and very strange and different, but I'm kind of loving it. All right, so that's where I'm at. The other book that I am going to start today is Long Island by Colm Toibin, and this will officially be the beginning of my June TBR, and I have been nimbly sidestepping reviews, videos, discussions that are already popping up about this book. I have gathered that people are loving it. That's all I want to know. And I'm reading it, and we'll be talking about it with Michael Clark, which we found out that, we both had it and wanted to start reading it. So it has joined in our lineup of buddy reads, and I think he started it last night. So I'm going to catch up and start reading it today, and I'm very excited because I love this author, and I loved Brooklyn, so I can't wait to see what is happening with Eilish and Tony and 20 years later. Okay, do you think that's enough? Have I read enough books this week? I didn't really say, oh, I'm just going to read like a maniac right at the end, but it feels like one of those, like the fireworks at the end of a show. So what was your favorite book in May? You can tell me in the comments. And what are you most excited about coming up for June? What are you reading this weekend? Share with me whatever you would like to share. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. And I will be back on Tuesday. Bye-bye.